Once you learn to measure people as objects, the rest is only follow-through. The Fictional Diaries of Jeffrey Dahmer.
The summer that wouldn't end. Bath, Ohio. Back roads, basements, empty houses. Summer 1978, spring 1979. Chapter 1. Graduation as an empty stage. Graduation is meant to be an ending, but also a beginning. They said it in speeches, over and over. Future, opportunity, adulthood. I watched my classmates smile into cameras, mouths open in rehearsed laughter, their bodies hugging each other in little bursts of celebration. Parents cried, flashes went off, names were called in a monotone. To me, it wasn't a beginning or an end. It was subtraction. Something had been removed from my days. The need to appear in a building at 8:15 every morning. The need to sit in a desk and pretend to follow rules. Now there was open space. And open space, if used correctly, is an instrument. When I came home from the ceremony, I didn't feel like celebrating. I went straight down into the basement. The air was different down there. Colder, heavier, steady. It didn't carry the smell of perfume, sweat, or cafeteria grease. It smelled like water, dust, and old iron. It was neutral, clinical. I liked that. The bulb overhead hummed when it was on. Its light created a circle that left the corners in shadow. I spent long minutes just standing inside that circle, testing how long I could remain perfectly still without moving a finger, without shifting my weight. I wanted to see if the house would forget me, if the air would stop recognizing I was there. That was practice. That was control. While my classmates moved on to parties, I practiced presence and absence. They went to lakes and bonfires. They shouted each other's names. They drank beer in front of their parents' cars. I stood in the basement and catalogued small things. How the chain swung after you pulled it. How long before it stopped. How long the bulb glowed faintly red after being shut off. How sound carried when you scraped a chair across concrete. I told myself, they are celebrating what they don't understand. I am preparing for what they cannot imagine. That was the first day of the summer that refused to end. Chapter 2. Roads as Laboratories. I drove constantly that summer. Not to reach anyone, not to see anything new, but to learn. Roads are teachers if you know how to listen. Medina Line, Everett Road, the quarry back routes, each became a circuit. I logged them mentally. Where the asphalt buckled, where the gravel turned soft, where the ditch widened. I learned when the headlights of one car would overlap with the approach of another. Timing became everything. I made observations like an engineer, not a poet. Porch lights. Which houses left them on all night? Which turned them off after midnight? Windows. Which ones glowed blue from television? Which ones went dark early? Parking lots. The groceries side lot. Always empty by 11 except one employee car. The laundromat. 2 machines still running with clothes inside well past midnight. I counted trains. 39 seconds between the warning bell and the engine's arrival. I timed traffic lights in Richfield. 28 seconds green, 4 seconds yellow, 29 red. These were not distractions, they were calibrations. Every road became predictable once I drove it enough times. Every pattern repeated itself. People think small towns are safe because nothing happens. The truth is that small towns are vulnerable because everything happens the same way, at the same time, night after night. Predictability is exposure. Exposure is opportunity. At first, I drove alone just to watch. By midsummer, I drove to test. How long could I sit on the shoulder before anyone slowed down to ask if I needed help? Answer: Never, unless you left the hood open. How long would it take for someone to notice a car parked at the quarry? Answer: hours. How long until a neighbor reported a teenager standing near the laundromat? Answer: they never did. These weren't fantasies. These were trials. Trials meant to confirm what I already suspected. That invisibility was not an accident. It was a choice. Chapter 3. Empty houses, honest rooms. Vacant houses taught me truths that occupied one's head. A family fills the space with noise, with clutter, with excuses. An empty house strips it back to structure, and structure doesn't lie. I learned how to enter quietly. Most didn't require force. A window left unlatched, a door that no longer caught properly. Once inside, I studied. I didn't need furniture. I needed evidence of patterns. A carpet worn at one end meant the couch had always been there. Scratches by a doorframe meant a dog, probably big. Pencil marks on a pantry wall, a child measured, name written beside dates. Each trace was data. Rooms were like bodies after dissection. You could see where organs had been, where arteries had carried life. Now empty, they showed their truth. Sometimes I took the Polaroid with me, not to capture beauty, there was none, but to freeze records. A mirror cracked into 6 shards, a shadow stretching longer than it should across linoleum. A wall with faint finger smudges at child height. I never stole objects. That would have missed the point. The value wasn't in things, but in space. How silence arranged itself when no one lived there. How absence became a presence you could measure. The houses whispered another lesson. When people are gone, the world continues exactly as it should. Rooms adapt. Silence deepens. Life moves around the absence without pausing. That was important to know. That was the foundation of collection. The world tolerates disappearance more easily than it admits. Chapter 4. Cataloguing the Living. By late August, I no longer thought of my classmates as individuals. They were entries, files in a system I had built in my head. Jennifer Morrison. High visibility, but with exploitable cracks. Fear of abandonment, dependence on approval. Tommy Kowalski. Volatile, prone to rage, easily provoked. Susan Walsh. Invisible, fragile, likely to be dismissed if missing. I stripped away names and replaced them with categories. Performative, volatile, fragile, unnoticed. The trick was reduction. A person is noisy, full of words, gestures, defenses. Categories are clean. A person can confuse you. A category cannot. The flask helped. 3 drinks spaced through the day kept me detached. Detached enough to observe without pity, without empathy. Empathy is distortion. It clouds precision. I began to test even during class. My seizure act, doing a Dahmer, as they called it, wasn't random anymore. It was controlled. I knew exactly how long until laughter faltered, how long until concern began. 45 seconds was the threshold, longer than most would admit. Each performance became another file. Who laughed the hardest? Who looked away? Who leaned forward with excitement? Jennifer always leaned forward. Tommy laughed too long. Susan looked down. Their reactions told me more than their conversations ever could. The mask dropped in those moments, and I saw what was underneath. That was the data I wanted. That was the data I filed. Chapter 5. The Collector's Logic. Observation leads to cataloging. Cataloging leads to selection. Selection leads to the thought of preservation. By September, the word collect had hardened. I thought of it constantly. Not killing, not hurting, collecting. taking people at their most authentic moment, the moment their mask fell, and freezing it forever. I imagine shelves lined with containers, not gore, not spectacle. Containers labeled cleanly: fragility, Susan; rage, Tommy; dependency, Jennifer. Each one a record of truth. Collectors choose carefully. You don't collect everything. You choose specimens that illustrate principles. That's how I saw it. Susan would show collapse under pressure. Tommy would show eruption. Jennifer would show the collapse of pride. Replaceability mattered. If Susan vanished, people would assume she'd run away. If Tommy vanished, people would assume he got into a fight and left. Jennifer was harder, but even she could be explained with the right story. The world supplies excuses for disappearance. I realized I could use those excuses as camouflage. I didn't yet act, but in my mind, the protocol formed. Identify weakness. Confirm replaceability. Induce authenticity. Preserve. It became a mantra. It repeated in my head every time I sat in the basement, every time I drove the back roads, every time I entered an empty house. Identify, confirm, induce, preserve. That is how collection became not fantasy, but inevitability. Chapter 6. Testing the Boundaries. By winter, I needed to test. Not to act fully, but to push limits. How long would it take for a student to be noticed if they left the cafeteria mid-lunch? I timed it. 22 minutes before a teacher asked. How long could a car sit at the quarry without interruption? Hours. How long before parents called police when their teenagers stayed out all night? 2 days. Each test was a proof, a confirmation that my arithmetic was sound. The world was tolerant of absence, more tolerant than it wanted to admit. I tested reactions, too. Extended my classroom seizures past 45 seconds, closer to a minute. Watched as laughter turned not to intervention, but to unease. Whispering whispers, shuffling feet. They didn't help me. They didn't call for anyone. They just watched. That told me everything. Observation became simulation. Simulation became rehearsal. Rehearsal is one step short of action. The steps lined up in my mind like tools on a bench. And each rehearsal made the thought of preservation feel less strange, less forbidden, more like the next logical step. Chapter 7. The Arithmetic of Consequence. By spring, my vocabulary had changed. I no longer thought in words like notice, mark, time. I thought in words like select, preserve, control. The basement was no longer just a room. It was a lab. The bulb overhead was an examination lamp. The workbench was an archive table. The roads were hunting routes. The houses were rehearsal halls. The people were specimens. I told myself the truth. What others call horror begins in arithmetic. Add observation to cataloging. Add cataloging to rehearsal. Add rehearsal to preservation. The sum is consequence. High school had ended, but the summer hadn't. It extended itself into fall, into winter, into spring. It stretched over every choice I made. It refused to die because I refused to let it. They thought I was undecided. The truth is that my decision had already been made. To collect. To preserve. To strip masks away and keep the truth for myself. The summer never ended. It became permanent. A permanent season inside me. And once you learn to measure people as objects, the rest is only follow-through.
Ah. I trust you enjoyed this glimpse into a most curious diary. If so, leave behind a small token of your delight with a like And do consider joining our circle by subscribing. And remember, ring the little bell, and you shall be the very first to know when another diary or a fresh entry emerges from the shadows. And if a whisper stirs in your mind, a thought, a riddle, perhaps a name of someone whose secrets you would dare to uncover, leave it for me below. I read them one by one. And who knows, your wish may guide my hand to the very next diary I choose from my collection.